My name is Frank Lawson. And tonight, I'm taking you deep into the heart of Chicago's justice system, where the relentless pursuit of convictions became more sacred than the pursuit of truth itself. Where innocent lives were bartered like poker chips for career advancement and political power. And where one woman's belated awakening of conscience signed her own death warrant. This is a story about ambition, about corruption, about a system that devoured the very people it swore to protect, and about the terrible price one person paid for finally choosing to tell the truth. March 7, 2021. A cold Monday morning in downtown Chicago. The kind of morning where the wind cuts through your coat and the sky hangs low and gray over the city. Diana Wolf, Assistant State Attorney for Cook County, was found dead in her 32nd floor apartment overlooking Lake Michigan. She was 42 years old. At the peak of her career. At the height of her power. The scene was disturbingly peaceful. Her body lay on the living room floor, positioned almost as if she'd simply laid down to sleep and never woken up. On the coffee table beside her sat an empty prescription bottle that had contained 30 sleeping pills. A crystal glass, half filled with expensive whiskey, sat nearby. The liquid inside tested positive for dissolved medication. And on her laptop, which sat open on the dining room table, a typed note. Simple. Direct. Final. I can't do this anymore. I'm sorry. The responding officers found no signs of forced entry. No signs of struggle. No defensive wounds. The door had been locked from the inside. The windows were sealed. Diana's fingerprints were the only ones on the pill bottle and the glass. The medical examiner estimated she'd been dead for approximately 6 hours when her body was discovered. Time of death, somewhere between 1 and 2 in the morning. Cause of death, acute overdose of prescription sedatives combined with alcohol. The toxicology report showed levels consistent with voluntary ingestion. The police investigation was brief and perfunctory. Detective Greg Hutchins, a 20-year veteran of the Chicago Police Department's Homicide Division, led the inquiry. He interviewed Diana's neighbors. None had heard anything unusual that night. He reviewed her recent case files. Everything appeared normal. He spoke with her colleagues at the state attorney's office. They all described her as dedicated, professional, perhaps a bit stressed lately, but nothing alarming. Within 72 hours, the case was officially closed. Suicide. Another tragic victim of the pressures of prosecutorial work. The news cycle picked it up for a day, maybe 2. Prominent Chicago prosecutor dies in apparent suicide. A few paragraphs. A photo from her last courtroom victory. Then the city moved on to the next story, the next tragedy, the next headline. Diana Wolf was cremated according to her will. A small memorial service was held. Colleagues offered condolences. Then she was filed away into memory, another casualty of a demanding profession. But death, I've learned over 15 years of investigative journalism, rarely tells its full story in the official reports. The truth hides in the details, in the inconsistencies, in the things that don't quite fit the narrative everyone wants to believe. 6 weeks after Diana's death, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon in late April, an unmarked package arrived at my office. Brown paper wrapping. No return address. Postmarked from Chicago but from a zip code I didn't recognize. Inside was a flash drive and a single piece of paper with a message written in shaky, desperate handwriting. Listen to these recordings. Diana Wolf didn't kill herself. She was murdered because she was going to expose everything. They're still covering it up. Please. Someone needs to know the truth. No signature. No contact information. Just that plea and a flash drive. I've received anonymous tips before. Most lead nowhere. Some are pranks. A few are genuine. Something about this one felt different. The desperation in that handwriting. The specificity of the claim. I plugged the flash drive into my computer. 7 audio files, each labeled with a date. All from the 2 weeks before Diana's death. I clicked on the first one, dated February 22nd. Diana's voice came through my speakers. I'd seen her in court before, heard her cross-examine witnesses with surgical precision. But this wasn't that voice. This was frightened. Shaking. Raw. "We can't keep doing this, Marcus. Please. You have to understand. Those men are innocent. The evidence we used to convict them was manufactured. We destroyed their lives. Families. Futures. Everything. And for what? For statistics? For conviction rates?" A male voice responded. Calm. Almost patronizing. Dangerously controlled. "Diana, you're having second thoughts. That's understandable. This work is difficult. It takes a toll. But you need to remember what's at stake here. Your career. Everything you've built. Your reputation. Not just yours. All of ours. We're a team. We've always been a team. I don't care about my career anymore. Don't you understand that? I can't sleep. I can't look at myself in the mirror. Every time I close my eyes, I see their faces. Marcus Johnson. Kevin Hartley. Andre Washington. All of them. Innocent men we sent to prison. You need to take some time off. You're burned out. We'll talk about this when you're thinking more clearly. I am thinking clearly. For the first time in years, I'm actually seeing clearly. And what I see is monstrous. We have to come forward. We have to make this right. That would be a terrible mistake, Diana. Think about what you're saying. Think about the consequences. Not just for you. For everyone involved. For the entire system. Maybe the system deserves to be exposed. The call ended abruptly. I sat back in my chair, my heart pounding. I played the second recording. Then the third. Each one more desperate than the last. Diana's voice growing more frantic. The responses from the people she called becoming more threatening. In one recording, she was sobbing. "I have the list. 5 cases. 5 innocent men we knowingly convicted. The new DNA tests prove it beyond any doubt. We knew the evidence was questionable back then, but we pushed it through anyway. We manufactured certainty where there was only doubt. We coerced witnesses. We suppressed exculpatory evidence. We lied. To judges. To juries. To the public. We lied, and innocent people went to prison." Another voice, harsher this time. "Stop talking like this, Diana. You're going to destroy everything we've built over the past decade. Think about the victims we've helped. Think about the dangerous criminals we've taken off the streets. By putting innocent people behind bars. That's not justice. That's not helping anyone. That's just cruelty disguised as efficiency. You're being emotional and irrational. We'll discuss this later when you've calmed down." "No. There won't be a later. I'm done. I'm going to the Innocence Project. I'm going to the FBI. I'm going to the press. I'm bringing everything I have. Every file. Every piece of fabricated evidence. Every coerced witness statement. All of it. The truth is coming out." The final recording was from March 6th. The night before Diana died. Her voice was barely above a whisper, as if she was afraid of being overheard even in her own apartment. "I know you're listening to this. I know you're monitoring my phone calls. I know you're tracking my movements. But I'm not backing down. I'm not afraid anymore. Or maybe I am afraid, but I'm doing this anyway. Tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., I have an appointment at the FBI field office. I'm bringing them everything. The fabricated evidence. The witness tampering. The falsified forensic reports. The payments to informants. All of it. You can threaten me. You can try to intimidate me. But I'm past caring. This ends tomorrow. A different voice responded. Not the calm, patronizing tone from earlier. This was cold. Hard. Final. You're making a fatal mistake, Diana. You have one last chance to reconsider. Think very carefully about what you're about to do. Because once you cross this line, there's no going back. For any of us. I crossed the line years ago when I started convicting innocent people. Now I'm trying to find my way back. I just hope it's not too late. It already is. The recording ended. 12 hours later, Diana Wolf was dead. I listened to all 7 recordings 3 times. Took notes. Transcribed key passages. There was no doubt in my mind. This wasn't suicide. This was murder. Premeditated. Calculated. Executed by people with the resources and authority to make it look like something it wasn't. But who had sent me these recordings? And why? Someone who had access to Diana's phone calls. Someone who knew what had really happened. Someone who was either involved in the conspiracy or close enough to it to understand the danger. Someone who wanted the truth exposed but was too afraid to come forward themselves. I needed to investigate Diana Wolf's life and career. Understand who she really was. What she'd done. What she'd discovered. And who had the most to lose from her revelations. I started with public records. Diana's background was a classic American success story, at least on the surface. Born Diana Marie Wolf on August 14, 1978, in Chicago's South Side. Her father, Robert Wolf, worked 40 years on the assembly line at a manufacturing plant before it closed in the early 90s. Her mother, Patricia, spent 3 decades serving lunch to elementary school children, coming home every evening smelling of cafeteria food and industrial cleaning products. Diana had 2 younger brothers. One became an electrician. The other worked construction. Solid, working-class family. The kind of people who believed in hard work, following the rules, and trusting the system. Diana was the first in her family to go to college. She started at a community college while working 2 part-time jobs, one at a grocery store, another at a legal aid clinic where she filed paperwork and answered phones. That's where she first fell in love with the law. With the idea of justice. With the power to make a difference in people's lives. She transferred to the University of Illinois, majored in political science, graduated with honors. Then came law school at Northwestern, one of the top programs in the country. She took out massive student loans, worked nights and weekends, barely slept. But she made it through. Passed the bar exam on her first attempt with one of the highest scores in her class. At 28 years old, Diana Wolf joined the Cook County State's Attorney's Office as a junior prosecutor. Started with misdemeanors. Traffic violations. Petty theft. Minor drug possessions. The kind of cases that teach you how to stand in a courtroom, how to present evidence, how to persuade a jury. And she was good. Really good. Within 2 years, she'd moved up to handling felonies. Assaults. Robberies. Her win rate was impressive, hovering around 85%, well above the office average. By age 35, Diana was prosecuting major cases. Murders. Sexual assaults. Organized crime. The cases that make headlines and build reputations. And her conviction rate kept climbing. 88%. 90%. 93%. By the time she was 40, Diana Wolf had a 97% conviction rate. In a system where even the best prosecutors typically win 70 to 75% of their trials, she was a phenomenon. A legend. The prosecutor you wanted handling your case if you were a victim's family. The prosecutor you feared if you were accused of a crime. Legal journals wrote profiles about her methods. How she prepared witnesses. How she presented evidence. How she anticipated defense strategies and neutralized them before they could gain traction. Other prosecutors studied her techniques. Law schools invited her to give guest lectures on effective prosecution. But as I dug deeper into Diana's cases, reading through court transcripts and appeal filings, I started noticing patterns that troubled me deeply. Many of Diana's convictions relied heavily on eyewitness testimony. Now, any first-year law student knows that eyewitness identification is notoriously unreliable. Study after study has proven this. People misremember. They misidentify. They're influenced by suggestive police procedures. Yet Diana built case after case on eyewitness accounts, often from witnesses with questionable credibility. Several of her high-profile convictions featured forensic evidence that seemed almost too perfect. DNA matches described as absolute certainties. Fingerprint analyses with no margin for error. Ballistics reports that eliminated all other possibilities. All presented by the same small group of expert witnesses from the Chicago Crime Lab. And in multiple cases, defense attorneys had filed complaints and appeals alleging witness coercion, evidence tampering, and prosecutorial misconduct. These appeals were routinely denied. The conviction stood. Diana's record remained unblemished. Until recently. I found a series of small news articles from the past year, buried deep in the local news sections of Chicago papers. Not front-page stories. Not investigations. Just brief updates. Legal notices, essentially. 5 men convicted in cases prosecuted by Diana Wolf had been exonerated, proven innocent through new DNA evidence or other newly discovered information. 5 men whose lives had been destroyed by wrongful convictions. Marcus Johnson, age 34 at the time of his arrest in 2012. Convicted of first-degree murder in the shooting death of a convenience store clerk. Sentenced to 40 years. He served 9 years before DNA evidence proved that blood found at the crime scene, blood that had been attributed to him at trial, was actually from a different person entirely. Released in February 2021. Kevin Hartley, age 27 at arrest in 2014. Convicted of armed robbery and aggravated assault. Sentenced to 25 years. Served 7 years before surveillance footage from a neighboring business, footage that had somehow been overlooked during the original investigation, showed he was 3 miles away at the time of the crime. Released in April 2021. Andre Washington, age 31 at arrest in 2015. Convicted of sexual assault. Sentenced to 30 years. Served 6 years before DNA from the rape kit, which had been retested with newer technology, matched a different man who was already in prison for similar crimes. Released in June 2021. Luis Mendez, age 29 at arrest in 2016. Convicted of second-degree murder. Sentenced to 22 years. Served 5 years before the murder weapon was retested and showed DNA and fingerprints from someone else entirely, someone who later confessed to the crime. Released in August 2021. James Clayton, age 33 at arrest in 2017. Convicted of drug trafficking and conspiracy. Sentenced to 18 years. Served 4 years before it was proven that the confidential informant who had testified against him had been paid by police and had fabricated his entire story. Released in October 2021. 5 innocent men. Combined, they had lost 31 years of their lives. 31 years in maximum security prisons for crimes they didn't commit. 31 years away from their families, their friends, their futures. Marriages destroyed. Children who grew up without fathers. Careers that never happened. Lives irrevocably damaged. All convicted in cases prosecuted by Diana Wolf and her team. But here's what caught my attention and sent a chill down my spine. All 5 exonerations happened between February and October of 2021. A span of just 9 months. And Diana Wolf died in March, right in the middle of that period. That wasn't coincidence. Someone was systematically proving Diana's convictions were fraudulent. Piece by piece. case by case, building an undeniable pattern of corruption. And Diana had known about it. Known that the facade she'd built was crumbling. Known that innocent men were being freed because of evidence that proved she'd helped put them away wrongfully. That knowledge had destroyed her. Not literally at first, but spiritually, emotionally. The recordings I'd heard made that clear. Her conscience, dormant for so many years, had finally awakened. And it was demanding accountability. Diana had made a choice. She could stay silent, protect herself and everyone else involved, and live with the guilt. Or she could tell the truth, expose the corruption, and face the consequences. She chose truth. And that decision had gotten her killed. I needed to talk to the exonerated men. Hear their stories directly. Understand what had happened during their trials. See if they could provide details about how Diana and her team had secured their convictions. I started with Marcus Johnson. Through some research and a few phone calls, I learned he was living in a halfway house on Chicago's west side, trying to rebuild his life after 9 years in prison for a murder he didn't commit. I called and explained who I was and what I was investigating. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then, finally, "Why? What's the point? It's over. I'm out. I just want to move forward." "Because Diana Wolf is dead," I said. "And I think she was murdered because she was going to admit that she helped frame you and others. Don't you want to know the truth about what happened to her?" Another long silence. Yeah, I do. When can we meet?" The next day, I drove to a coffee shop on the south side where Marcus had agreed to meet me. The neighborhood was tired, worn down by decades of disinvestment. Boarded up storefronts. Empty lots. But people still lived here, still tried to build lives here. Marcus was waiting at a corner table when I arrived. He was 41 now, but he looked older. Prison ages you. The constant stress, the violence, the knowledge that you're innocent but nobody believes you. It takes a toll that doesn't go away just because you finally get released. He was thin, almost gaunt, with close-cropped gray hair and eyes that had seen too much. When he shook my hand, his grip was firm but his palms were scarred. I'd read in his case file that he'd been attacked in prison multiple times. "Thank you for meeting me," I said as we sat down. "I don't like talking about this," he replied. His voice was quiet, controlled. "Every time I think I'm finally moving past it, something pulls me back. But if Diana Wolf was murdered because of what we went through, then yeah, I want to help figure out what happened. Tell me about your case. What really happened?" Marcus took a deep breath. "I was working night shift at a warehouse. Loading dock supervisor. 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Pay wasn't great, but it was honest work. I was saving money, trying to get back into school, maybe get a degree. I had my whole life ahead of me." He paused, staring out the window. March 15, 2012. I got off work at 6 a.m. like usual. Walked home. It was about a 20-minute walk. I got to my apartment, made some breakfast, went to bed. Slept until about 1 in the afternoon. Then the cops showed up. What did they want? They said there'd been a shooting the night before. Convenience store robbery 2 blocks from where I lived. The clerk had been killed. They wanted to ask me some questions. Could I come down to the station? I said sure, of course. I had nothing to hide. I thought I was helping them. Marcus's jaw tightened. That was the last time I was free for 9 years. They took me to the station. Put me in an interrogation room. Started asking where I was the night before. I told them, at work. They said a witness had placed me near the store. I said that's impossible, I was at work. They said my fingerprints were found on the gun. I said that's impossible too, I'd never even seen that gun. But they arrested you anyway. Charged me with first-degree murder. My public defender tried. He really did. But the evidence against me seemed overwhelming. An eyewitness who identified me in a lineup said he saw me clear as day. And the forensic analyst, Dr. Pierce, testified that my fingerprints were on the gun. A definite match. 99.8% certain, he said. Like it was indisputable scientific fact. But your defense presented evidence you were at work? My supervisor testified. Showed my time cards. Security footage from the warehouse. But Diana Wolf destroyed all of it. She suggested the time cards could be falsified. Implied my supervisor was lying to protect me. Claimed the security footage was too grainy to definitively show it was me. And she kept hammering on the eyewitness and the fingerprints. Physical evidence, she called it. Scientific evidence that couldn't lie. How long was the trial? 6 days. Jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty. 40 years. Marcus's voice cracked slightly. My mother was in the courtroom. She collapsed when they read the verdict. Had to be taken out in an ambulance. She died 2 years later. I couldn't even go to her funeral. We sat in silence for a moment. I didn't know what to say. What do you say to someone whose life was stolen? When did you find out the conviction was wrong? I finally asked. Last year. My lawyer from the Innocence Project got the evidence retested with new DNA technology. Turned out the blood they said was mine wasn't even close. Different blood type. Different genetic markers. Everything. And when they looked closer at the fingerprint analysis, it was garbage. The prints on the gun didn't match mine at all. The original analysis was either grossly incompetent or deliberately fraudulent. What about the eyewitness? Recanted. Said the police had pressured him. Told him if he didn't identify someone, he'd be charged as an accessory. So he picked me out of the lineup. Diana Wolf knew he was unreliable. She had to know. But she used him anyway because she needed someone to convict. Did you ever speak to her? After you were released? Marcus shook his head. I thought about it. Thought about confronting her. Asking her how she could do that to me. How she could send an innocent man to prison and then sleep at night. But my lawyer advised against it. Said to focus on moving forward, not backward. And then she died. Yeah. And I felt... He trailed off, searching for words. I felt relieved. Then I felt guilty for feeling relieved. Then I felt angry that she got to die peacefully while I rotted in hell for 9 years. It's complicated. I interviewed the other exonerated men over the following week. Kevin Hartley told me about surveillance footage that had been overlooked, footage that definitively proved he was nowhere near the scene of the robbery he was convicted of. He described how Diana had convinced the jury that the timestamps could be wrong, that the footage might have been from a different day, creating just enough doubt about his alibi to secure a conviction. Andre Washington broke down crying as he recounted his sexual assault conviction. He'd been identified by the victim, who was certain he was her attacker. Diana had presented the identification with absolute confidence. But the DNA told a different story. The real rapist was someone else entirely, someone who looked nothing like Andre. The victim had been traumatized, confused, influenced by suggestive police procedures. And Diana had used her trauma to convict an innocent man. Luis Mendez described his murder conviction in meticulous detail. How the murder weapon, a knife, had been found near his apartment. How Dr. Pierce had testified that Luis's DNA was on the handle. How Diana had woven a narrative of jealousy and violence that convinced the jury Luis was a killer. All of it based on forensic evidence that later testing proved was contaminated, mishandled, and ultimately worthless. And James Clayton told me about the confidential informant, a man named Devin Price, who had testified that James was running a major drug operation. Devin described elaborate details about drug deals, territories, suppliers. All completely fabricated. Devon was a drug addict who'd been arrested multiple times. Police offered him money and a reduction in his own charges if he'd testify against James. So he invented a story. And Diana presented him as a credible witness, despite knowing his history and motivations. In every single case, the pattern was the same. Weak evidence presented as incontrovertible. Questionable witnesses presented as reliable. Forensic analysis that was either sloppy or deliberately misleading. And Diana Wolf at the center of it all, weaving narratives and presenting cases that secured convictions regardless of actual guilt or innocence. But one name kept appearing in all these cases. One person whose testimony was crucial to almost every conviction. Dr. Raymond Pierce, forensic analyst with the Chicago Crime Lab. The expert whose scientific testimony gave credibility to shaky prosecutions. The man who provided the objective evidence that juries trusted. I needed to talk to Dr. Raymond Pierce. And I needed him to tell me the truth about what he'd done and why. Dr. Raymond Pierce lived in Oak Park, a quiet, tree-lined suburb just west of Chicago. The kind of neighborhood where professionals retire after successful careers. Neat lawns. Well-maintained Victorian houses. A sense of order and respectability. I'd done my research before approaching him. Raymond Pierce, age 56. Ph.D. in forensic science from the University of Michigan. 23 years with the Chicago Crime Lab, testified as an expert witness in over 400 cases. Received numerous commendations and awards for his work. A pillar of the forensic community. And as of February 2021, just 1 month before Diana's death, quietly retired. No press release. No retirement party mentioned in any news. Just gone. That timing was suspicious. Very suspicious. I drove out to Oak Park on a Thursday afternoon. Pierce's house was a modest 2-story colonial painted pale yellow with white trim. A small garden in front, meticulously maintained. A late model sedan in the driveway. Everything proper and orderly. I rang the doorbell. After a moment, the door opened. Dr. Pierce stood there, tall and thin with gray hair combed neatly to the side. He wore khakis and a cardigan sweater, reading glasses hanging from a chain around his neck. He looked like someone's kindly grandfather. Dr. Pierce? My name is Frank Lawson. I'm an investigative journalist. I'd like to talk to you about Diana Wolf. His face went pale. Actually pale. The color drained from his cheeks in real time. His hand on the doorknob tightened. I have nothing to say to journalists. I'm retired. Please leave. Dr. Pierce, I know about the 5 exonerations. Marcus Johnson. Kevin Hartley. Andre Washington. Luis Mendez. James Clayton. All cases where you provided forensic testimony. All cases now proven to be wrongful convictions. And I know Diana Wolf died under very suspicious circumstances, just as she was planning to expose what really happened in those cases. Diana committed suicide. Everyone knows that. It was a tragedy. Diana was murdered. And I think you know why. I think you know exactly why. Because you were part of it. He started to close the door. I put my foot in the way, gently but firmly. Dr. Pierce, I have recordings. Audio files of Diana's phone calls from the 2 weeks before her death. She talks about fabricated evidence. Falsified forensic reports. Witness tampering. Your name comes up multiple times. Now you can talk to me, help me understand what really happened, maybe even help bring the people responsible for Diana's death to justice. Or you can slam this door, and I can go directly to the FBI with everything I have. Your choice. But either way, the truth is coming out. He stared at me for a long moment. I could see the conflict playing across his face. Fear. Guilt. Resignation. Finally, he stepped aside. Come in. But I'm not admitting to anything until I hear these supposed recordings. His living room was exactly what I expected. Neat. Organized. Bookshelves filled with scientific texts arranged alphabetically. Framed certificates and awards on the walls. Photos of what looked like adult children and grandchildren. A life of respectability and achievement. We sat in facing armchairs. I pulled out my phone and played portions of Diana's recordings. As he listened, Pierce's face went through a progression of emotions. Denial. Recognition. Fear. And finally, something that looked like relief. When the recordings ended, he sat silently for almost a full minute. Then he spoke, his voice quiet and hollow. It started so innocently. That's what I keep telling myself. It started with good intentions. Tell me how it started. He took a deep breath. About 15 years ago, I was working a homicide case. Gang shooting. Multiple witnesses, but no physical evidence tying any specific person to the crime. The detective was frustrated. He said they knew who did it, but they couldn't prove it. He asked if I could expedite the ballistics analysis, maybe find something they'd missed. And you did? I rushed it. Cut some corners. Spent half the time I normally would. And I found a match that was questionable. Not definitive. But the detective needed something. So I wrote my report with more certainty than I actually felt. Said the match was highly probable. That was enough for an arrest. And the suspect was convicted? Yes. And maybe he was guilty. I told myself he probably was. The detectives wouldn't target an innocent person, right? They just needed help making the case stick. So I helped them. And it felt good, actually. Helping get a dangerous criminal off the streets. Helping bring closure to a victim's family. Pierce stood up and walked to the window, staring out at his quiet street. After that, it happened more and more. Detectives would call me. Ask for favors. Rush this analysis. Be more certain about that result. Testify with absolute confidence even when the science was less than absolute. And I did it. Every time. Why? He turned back to me. Because I started getting recognition. Promotions. Awards. The prosecutors loved me because I gave them what they needed. The detectives loved me because I closed their cases. My supervisors loved me because I made the lab look good. I was invaluable. Indispensable. And Diana Wolf? Diana was the architect. She didn't just passively accept questionable evidence. She actively coordinated the whole system. She'd meet with detectives before arrests were even made. They'd bring her suspects they believed were guilty, or more often, suspects they just wanted off the streets for whatever reason. Diana would assess the case and tell them exactly what evidence she needed to secure a conviction. Then they'd come to me. And you'd provide that evidence. I'd manufacture the certainty she required. If she needed a fingerprint to be a definitive match, I'd testify it was definitive, even if it was really just probable, or even questionable. If she needed DNA to be exclusive to one person, I'd phrase my testimony to make it sound absolute, even when there was room for doubt. If she needed ballistics to eliminate all other possibilities, I'd testify with complete confidence, even when the science couldn't actually support that level of certainty. And it worked. Every single time. Diana was brilliant in court. She knew how to present forensic evidence in a way that made it seem irrefutable. She'd have me explain the science in simple terms, then she'd build her case around my testimony like it was the foundation of absolute truth. Juries ate it up. Defense attorneys couldn't shake me because I'd been doing this for years. I knew how to sound authoritative and unshakable. Pierce sat back down, his shoulders slumped. He suddenly looked much older than 56. For years I told myself we were serving justice. That these people were probably guilty anyway. That we were just helping the system work more efficiently. But then, the exoneration started. Marcus Johnson was the first. When his case came up for post-conviction DNA testing, I wasn't worried. I remembered testifying about blood evidence. I'd said it matched his blood type. But when the new DNA results came back, it wasn't even close. Different person entirely. And when I went back and looked at my original analysis, I realized I'd overstated the certainty. The blood type was consistent with Marcus, but also with millions of other people. I'd made it sound exclusive when it wasn't. But that could be an honest mistake. It could have been. But then came Kevin's case. The fingerprints I'd said were his weren't even close. Then Andre's case. The DNA I testified about was contaminated. Then Luis's case. The knife I'd analyzed had been mishandled. Then James's case. I hadn't done any actual forensic work on that one, but I'd testified about the reliability of confidential informant testimony, lending scientific credibility to a completely fabricated story. Pierce put his face in his hands. 5 cases. 5 innocent men. And those are just the ones that got overturned. How many others were there? How many people are still in prison right now because of evidence I falsified? We sat in silence. This was a confession. A full admission of systematic evidence tampering and perjury. It was everything I needed. But I needed more. Diana figured it out too. She called me in January. Early January, right after Marcus Johnson was released. She was distraught. Said she couldn't sleep. Couldn't eat. Kept thinking about all the cases we'd worked together. She wanted to review every one of them. Go back through everything. Find out how many others might be innocent. What did you tell her? I tried to talk her out of it. Told her it would destroy everything. Not just our careers, but the entire system's credibility. Every conviction would be questioned. Every case thrown into doubt. Defense attorneys would have a field day. Guilty people would go free. It would be chaos. But she didn't care. She said she'd rather face chaos than continue living with the lie. She said we had a moral obligation to come forward. To admit what we'd done. To help free any innocent people still in prison. She said it was the only way to make things right. And you disagreed. I begged her not to do it. We all did. It wasn't just me. The detectives. The supervisors at the state attorney's office. Everyone who knew what was really going on. We all tried to convince her that coming forward would cause more harm than good. That we should just be more careful going forward. That we should quietly help with any legitimate post-conviction appeals. But not blow the whole thing up. She wouldn't listen. No. She'd made up her mind. Said her conscience wouldn't let her stay silent anymore. I remember her exact words. She said, I'd rather be destroyed by the truth than preserved by a lie. When was the last time you spoke with her? March 4th. 3 days before she died. She called me and said she had an appointment with the FBI on March 7th. Said she was bringing them everything. All her case files. All her notes. A full confession of how the system worked. Who was involved. How long it had been going on. Everything. How did you respond? I panicked. Told her she was making a terrible mistake. That there were other people involved who wouldn't let this happen. People with more power than her. People who would protect the system at all costs. Did you threaten her? No. I would never. I didn't want her to do it, but I would never hurt her. But I told her other people might not be so restrained. She said she knew the risks. Said she'd already made arrangements to protect herself. Had copies of everything stored in multiple places. Had dead man's switches set up. She thought she was safe. But she wasn't. Pierce shook his head slowly. The last thing she said to me was, if something happens to me, Raymond, if I suddenly die or disappear, you'll know it wasn't an accident. And I hope you'll have the courage to finish what I started. Then she hung up. That was March 4th at around 8 p.m. 3 days later she was dead. You think she was murdered? I know she was. Diana didn't kill herself. She was too determined. Too focused on exposing the truth. Someone got to her before she could get to the FBI. Who? I don't know for certain. But the detective who investigated her death was Greg Hutchins. He's one of the detectives who was deeply involved in the evidence fabrication scheme. He worked dozens of cases with Diana. If anyone had the most to lose from her coming forward, it was him. And he was the one who controlled the investigation into her death. Who decided it was suicide. Who made sure no one looked too closely at the inconsistencies. What inconsistencies? Diana was left-handed. She wrote everything by hand. I saw her case notes for years. Beautiful handwriting. Very distinctive. But her suicide note was typed. Why would someone who always wrote by hand type their final message? And the note was on her laptop, which required her password. How would someone else know her password? Unless she was forced to type it. Or someone who knew her password typed it after she was already dead or dying. I leaned forward. Dr. Pierce, would you be willing to testify to all of this? Make an official statement to the authorities? He was quiet for a long time. Then, finally, if you can guarantee my safety, if you can make sure I'm protected, then yes. Yes, I'll testify. Because Diana was right. I can't live with this anymore either. I helped destroy innocent lives. The least I can do is help expose the truth, even if it means destroying what's left of my own life. I'll make sure you're protected. I have contacts at the FBI. They'll want to hear everything you have to say. As I left Pierce's house, I felt a mix of emotions. I had a confession. I had evidence of systematic corruption. But I still didn't have proof of who killed Diana. For that, I needed to confront Detective Greg Hutchins directly. But first, I needed to understand more about the missing piece of this puzzle. James Clayton, the last exonerated man, had disappeared 3 weeks ago. His family had filed a missing persons report. The police claimed they were investigating, but nothing had been found. Was James dead? Was he in hiding? Or was he hunting the people who'd destroyed his life? I called James's sister, LaToya Clayton. She agreed to meet me at her home on the south side. LaToya was in her late 30s, a nurse who worked at Cook County Hospital. She opened the door with tired, worried eyes. The kind of worry that comes from not knowing if your brother is alive or dead. "Thank you for seeing me," I said as she let me inside. "You're the journalist investigating Diana Wolf's death?" "Yes. And I'm trying to find out what happened to your brother." She led me to a small living room. Photos of James covered one wall. Graduation pictures. Family gatherings. A life interrupted by 4 years of wrongful imprisonment. "James was doing okay after he got out," LaToya said. "Not great, but okay. He was staying with me. Looking for work. Trying to readjust. But then... Then what? About 2 weeks after his release, he started getting phone calls. He wouldn't tell me who they were from, but I could tell they scared him. He'd go pale. Start shaking. After each call, he'd be paranoid for hours. Checking the windows. Looking over his shoulder. Did he tell you what the calls were about? Not directly. But I heard parts of one call. Someone was telling him to keep his mouth shut. Not to talk to lawyers. Not to talk to the press. Not to file any lawsuits. Just take his release and disappear quietly. Did he recognize the voice? He said it was one of the detectives who'd arrested him. Hutchins, I think. Detective Hutchins. My pulse quickened. What happened after that? James got more and more scared. He said these people had already killed Diana Wolf. That they wouldn't hesitate to kill him too if he caused trouble. I told him to go to the police, but he laughed. Said the police were the ones threatening him. When did he disappear? 3 weeks ago. He left the house one morning and never came back. Didn't take any clothes. Didn't take his phone. Just gone. I filed a missing persons report, but the detective assigned to investigate was... She paused. It was Hutchins. The same one who'd threatened James. He came to my house, asked a few questions, wrote some notes, and that was it. No real investigation. No follow-up. Nothing. Have you heard from James at all? No. And I'm terrified. I don't know if he's hiding somewhere, too scared to contact me. Or if they found him and... She couldn't finish the sentence. I spent another hour with LaToya, getting more details about James's arrest, conviction, and release. Then I left, my mind racing. James Clayton was the key to everything. If he was still alive and in hiding, he could testify about the threats he'd received. About Hutchins's direct intimidation. That, combined with Pierce's confession and Diana's recordings, would be enough to trigger a major federal investigation. But I had to find him first. And I had to do it before Hutchins did. I decided it was time to confront Hutchins directly. Force his hand. Maybe get him to reveal something useful. I called the Chicago Police Department and asked to speak with Detective Greg Hutchins. I identified myself as a journalist working on a feature about Diana Wolf's career and legacy. Hutchins agreed to meet me at the Area North Detective Bureau the next day. The bureau was a gray concrete building on the north side, all harsh fluorescent lights and worn linoleum floors. Hutchins met me in the lobby and led me to a small conference room. He was in his mid-50s, with the weathered face of someone who'd spent decades dealing with the worst humanity had to offer. Thick build. Hard eyes. The kind of cop who'd seen everything and been impressed by none of it. We sat across from each other at a battered conference table. I set my phone on the table between us, recording app open. Do you mind if I record this? Go ahead. I've got nothing to hide. Tell me about Diana Wolf. How long did you work with her? About 12 years. She was a hell of a prosecutor. Tough. Smart. Dedicated to getting justice for victims. Her conviction rate was remarkable. 97%. She was good at her job. Or maybe she was good at convicting people regardless of whether they were actually guilty. Hutchins's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. A wariness. That's a serious accusation. It's a serious situation. 5 men she convicted have been exonerated. 5 innocent men sent to prison in cases you investigated. That's not a coincidence. That's a pattern. Sometimes the evidence we have at the time seems solid, and later, new technology or information proves otherwise. That's unfortunate, but it doesn't mean anyone did anything wrong. I have recordings, Detective. Audio files of Diana's phone calls from the 2 weeks before she died. In them, she talks about fabricated evidence, coerced witnesses, falsified forensic reports. She mentions your name specifically. She was planning to expose everything. To go to the FBI? And then, very conveniently, she died before she could do that. Hutchins leaned back in his chair, his face impassive. Diana was under tremendous stress. The exonerations were eating at her. She felt responsible, even though she'd just been doing her job. That kind of guilt, combined with the pressure of her position, it can make people unstable. Paranoid. She was clearly having some kind of breakdown. Her suicide note was typed. Diana was left-handed and wrote everything by hand. Why would she type her final message? I don't know. Maybe it was easier when she was emotional. Maybe she couldn't steady her hand enough to write. Or maybe someone else typed it after they killed her. Mr. Lawson, you're suggesting that a respected prosecutor was murdered, and that I somehow had something to do with it. That's defamatory. If you print any of this without solid proof, you'll be sued. I have proof. Diana's recordings. Dr. Raymond Pierce's confession about falsifying forensic evidence. Testimony from the exonerated men about how their cases were handled. And I have one more thing. James Clayton. For the first time, Hutchins's expression changed. Just for a moment. A flicker of something. Concern? Fear? What about James Clayton? He disappeared 3 weeks ago. Right around the time he would have started asking questions about his wrongful conviction. His sister says he was receiving threatening phone calls. From you. Telling him to stay quiet or face consequences. That's ridiculous. I've been investigating his disappearance. I have no idea where he is. Really? Because I think you know exactly where he is. Or what happened to him. Just like you know exactly what happened to Diana Wolf. Hutchins stood up. This interview is over. You're making wild accusations based on the paranoid delusions of a dead woman who was clearly mentally unstable. If you want to destroy your career by publishing conspiracy theories, that's your choice. But leave me out of it. He walked to the door, then turned back. And Mr. Lawson? Be careful. Chicago can be a dangerous city. People who stick their noses where they don't belong sometimes get hurt. Is that a threat, detective? It's advice. Take it however you want. He left, closing the door behind him. I sat there for a moment, my heart pounding. That had been a threat. Barely veiled, but definitely a threat. Which meant I was getting close. Close enough to make them nervous. I needed to move fast. I needed to get everything I had to the FBI before Hutchins or whoever was pulling the strings could silence me the way they'd silenced Diana. I left the police station and drove straight to the FBI's Chicago field office. I asked to speak with Agent Sarah Kimura, someone I'd worked with on a previous investigation. Within an hour, I was in a secure conference room, laying out everything I'd discovered. Agent Kimura listened intently, taking notes. When I finished, she sat back and exhaled slowly. This is massive, Frank. If even half of what you're saying is true, we're looking at systematic corruption spanning over a decade. Multiple wrongful convictions. Evidence tampering. Possibly murder. I have recordings. I have a confession from the forensic analyst. I have testimony from the victims. What I need is for you to find James Clayton before Hutchins does. And I need protection. Because I'm pretty sure I just made myself a target. We'll open an official investigation immediately. I'll need copies of everything you have. And we'll put you in protective custody until we can make arrests. No protective custody. I'm still working on this story. But I'll be careful. Frank. Sarah, I've been doing this for 15 years. I know how to stay safe. Just find James Clayton. And bring these people to justice. Over the next week, everything accelerated. The FBI began a formal investigation into Diana's death and the corruption scheme. They interviewed Dr. Pierce, who provided a full confession and agreed to testify. They obtained warrants for phone records, financial records, and digital communications from everyone involved. And then, 6 days after my meeting with Hutchins, I got a call from an unknown number. Mr. Lawson? This is James Clayton. My heart jumped into my throat. James! Thank God. Where are you? Are you safe? I'm safe. For now. I've been hiding. Moving around. Staying off the grid. I heard you've been looking for me. My sister told me you came to see her. James, you need to come in. Talk to the FBI. They're investigating everything. Diana's death. The wrongful convictions. The corruption scheme. They need your testimony. There was a long pause. I could hear traffic in the background. He was calling from somewhere public, probably from a burner phone. How do I know I can trust them? How do I know the FBI isn't compromised too? Because I've been working directly with them. Agent Sarah Kimura. She's clean. I'd stake my life on it. And they need to hear what happened to you. The threats you received. Everything. Another pause. Then, quietly, Hutchins came to see me. 2 days after I got out. Showed up at my sister's house. Said we needed to talk. Took me for a drive. What did he say? He said Diana Wolf was causing problems. That she'd lost her nerve. That she was planning to expose everyone involved in what he called the system. He said there were people much higher up than Diana who were committed to protecting that system at all costs. He said I had 2 choices. I could keep my mouth shut, disappear quietly, maybe even get some money to help me start over. Or I could make noise, and I'd end up back in prison. Or worse. He threatened to kill you. Not in those exact words. But the implication was crystal clear. He said Diana thought she was untouchable. She thought her position protected her. She was wrong. Nobody's untouchable. Did he admit to killing her? Not directly. But he didn't have to. I knew what he was telling me. He killed Diana. Or he ordered it done. And if I didn't cooperate, I'd be next. Why didn't you go to the police? James laughed bitterly. Go to the police? He asked the police. They all are. The whole system is corrupt. Who was I supposed to go to? The FBI. You should have gone to the FBI. I was scared. I'd just gotten out of prison after 4 years for a crime I didn't commit. 4 years of my life stolen because people like Hutchins and Diana lied. I wasn't thinking clearly. I just ran. Where are you now? I can't tell you that. Not over the phone. But I'll come in. I'll talk to your FBI agent. But I need immunity. Complete immunity for anything I might have done while I was hiding. I had to survive, Mr. Lawson. I did things I'm not proud of. I'll arrange it. Where can we meet? He gave me an address. An abandoned warehouse on the west side. Told me to come alone, no police, or he'd disappear again and I'd never find him. I called Agent Kimura immediately. Told her about James's call. Don't go alone, she said. This could be a setup. It's not. James is terrified. He won't come in unless he trusts the situation. I need to meet him first. Alone. Then I'll bring him to you. Frank, this is dangerous. If Hutchins finds out. He won't. James has been hiding for 3 weeks. He knows how to stay off the radar. Just have your team ready. Once I have him, we'll come straight to the field office. She didn't like it, but she agreed. 2 hours later, I was driving to the west side. The address James had given me was in an industrial area, mostly abandoned buildings and empty lots. The warehouse was a massive brick structure, windows broken, graffiti covering the walls. I parked across the street and waited. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the empty street. This was exactly the kind of place where bad things happened in Chicago. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Come to the back entrance. Door will be unlocked. I got out of my car and walked around the building. The back entrance was a rusted metal door, slightly ajar. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The interior was dark except for dim light filtering through the broken windows. The space was cavernous, old machinery still bolted to the concrete floor. The air smelled of rust and decay. James? I called out. My voice echoed through the empty space. Over here. I turned toward the voice. A figure emerged from the shadows. But it wasn't James Clayton. It was Detective Greg Hutchins. He was holding a gun. Pointed directly at me. You just couldn't leave it alone, could you, Lawson? His voice was calm, almost conversational. I told you Chicago was a dangerous city. I told you to be careful. But you didn't listen. My blood ran cold. Where's James? James is safe. For now. He's been safe this whole time because he was smart enough to do what I told him to do. Keep his mouth shut and disappear. Unlike Diana. Unlike you. You killed her. I did what needed to be done. Diana was going to destroy everything. Decades of work. Hundreds of convictions. Countless dangerous criminals taken off the streets. She was going to undermine all of it because of some misguided attack of conscience. Those 5 men were innocent. How many others are still in prison right now because of you? Does it matter? The system works, Lawson. It keeps people safe. Sure, maybe a few innocent people get caught up in it. That's unfortunate. But it's a small price to pay for order. For safety. Diana didn't understand that. She thought truth was more important than stability. So you killed her. Made it look like suicide. It was easier than I expected. I had a key to her apartment from an old case. Went there late on March 6th. She let me in. We talked. She was convinced she was doing the right thing. I tried to reason with her one last time. When that didn't work, he shrugged. I'd brought the pills with me. Crushed them up. Slipped them into her whiskey while she was in the other room. She drank it without even knowing. By the time she realized something was wrong, it was too late. I waited until she passed out. Staged the scene. Typed the note on her computer. You made one mistake. The note was typed. Diana always wrote by hand. I realized that afterward. But by then, it didn't matter. I was the lead investigator. I controlled the narrative. No one questioned it. Suicide made sense. Stressed prosecutor overwhelmed by guilt. It was perfect. Except it wasn't. People started asking questions. You started asking questions. And now you're going to stop. He raised the gun slightly, aiming at my chest. This will be ruled a tragic accident. Journalist investigating dangerous story, got in over his head, ended up in the wrong place at the wrong time. These things happen. The FBI knows everything. I gave them copies of all my evidence. Diana's recordings. Pierce's confession. If you kill me, it won't stop the investigation. It'll only prove everything I've been saying. Maybe. But you'll still be dead. And dead men can't testify. Before he could pull the trigger, lights blazed on from all directions. Flashlights. Spotlights. Voices shouting. FBI! Drop your weapon! Hands where we can see them! Hutchins spun around, momentarily blinded by the lights. In that instant, agents swarmed in from multiple directions. Within seconds, Hutchins was on the ground, gun kicked away, hands being cuffed behind his back. Agent Kimura approached me. You okay? Yeah. How did you? You think I was going to let you walk into a potential trap without backup? We've been here the whole time. And we got everything on recording. His full confession to murdering Diana Wolfe. Another agent approached, helping someone else walk toward us. James Clayton. He looked scared but alive. James reached out to us yesterday. Kimura explained. Told us Hutchins had been tracking him, threatening him. We set up this operation to draw Hutchins out, get him to incriminate himself. You used me as bait. We protected you. And it worked. We got a full confession. I looked at Hutchins being led away in handcuffs. He wasn't calm anymore. He was shouting, struggling against the agents holding him. Screaming about how the system was broken, how they were making a mistake, how he'd been protecting the city. Over the next 72 hours, everything unraveled completely. The FBI arrested Marcus Brennan, the deputy state's attorney and Diana's direct supervisor. They traced the $50,000 payment to Hutchins back to an offshore account controlled by Brennan. He'd been the one orchestrating the entire corruption scheme for over 12 years. Using Diana, using the detectives, using forensic analysts to boost conviction rates and advance his political career. When Diana threatened to expose everything, Brennan had given the order, and Hutchins had carried it out. They also arrested 2 other detectives who'd been part of the scheme, Nicole Ramirez and Thomas Kelly. Both had worked dozens of cases with Diana. Both had pressured witnesses and manufactured evidence. Both had known about Diana's murder and stayed silent. Dr. Raymond Pierce received immunity in exchange for his full testimony. He provided the FBI with detailed information about how the forensic fraud had worked, which cases had been compromised, and who else at the crime lab might have been involved. The Chicago Crime Lab was placed under federal oversight. Independent auditors began reviewing every case Pierce had worked on going back 15 years. The preliminary results were staggering. At least 43 additional convictions appeared to be questionable, possibly wrongful. James Clayton, along with the other 4 exonerated men, filed federal civil rights lawsuits against the city of Chicago and Cook County. The settlements would eventually total $38 million. Money couldn't give them back their stolen years, but it was something. A recognition of the tremendous harm that had been done to them. The trials took 18 months. But in the end, justice was served. Or at least, as much justice as the system could provide. Greg Hutchins was convicted of first-degree murder in Diana Wolf's death, along with conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and civil rights violations. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As the sentence was read, Hutchins showed no emotion. Just stared straight ahead, as if he still couldn't comprehend how it had all fallen apart. Marcus Brennan was convicted on multiple counts including conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice, evidence tampering, and civil rights violations. He received 45 years in federal prison. At his sentencing, he tried to give a speech about how he'd been trying to protect the city, how the system needed people willing to make tough choices. The judge cut him off and told him he'd disgraced his office and betrayed every principle of justice he'd sworn to uphold. Detectives Ramirez and Kelly both took plea deals. Ramirez got 15 years. Kelly got 12. Both agreed to testify about the full extent of the corruption scheme. Dr. Raymond Pierce, despite his cooperation and testimony, was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison for perjury and evidence tampering. At his sentencing, he addressed the court directly. Apologized to all the people he'd helped wrongfully convict. Said he'd spend the rest of his life trying to make amends for what he'd done. The judge acknowledged his cooperation but said some crimes were too serious to be fully forgiven. The fallout was massive. The state's attorney of Cook County resigned in disgrace. Several supervisors were fired or forced into retirement. The entire office underwent restructuring and implemented new oversight procedures. Independent review boards were created to examine questionable convictions. New protocols were established for forensic evidence. But no amount of reform could undo the damage that had been done. 43 additional wrongful convictions were overturned over the next 3 years. 43 more innocent people freed from prison. More lives destroyed. More families shattered. The total number of years stolen, more than anyone could calculate. And through it all, I kept thinking about Diana Wolf. About the woman who'd spent 12 years of her career convicting people, guilty and innocent alike, in pursuit of an unblemished record. Who told herself she was serving justice when she was really serving her own ambition. But who had finally, at the end, found the courage to face what she'd done. To acknowledge the terrible harm she'd caused. And to try, however belatedly, to make it right. That choice had cost her everything. Her reputation. Her career. Her life. But her truth had outlived her. Her recordings, her evidence, her planned confession to the FBI, they had all survived. And they had brought down an entire corrupt system. Had freed innocent people. Had exposed a conspiracy that might have continued for decades more if Diana hadn't finally said enough. I published my full investigation in a series of articles that ran for a full week. The response was overwhelming. National media picked up the story. Documentary filmmakers contacted me. Congressional hearings were scheduled to examine systematic corruption in prosecutors' offices nationwide. The series won several journalism awards. I was invited to speak at conferences, at law schools, at criminal justice reform events. People called me a hero for exposing the truth. But I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like someone who'd simply done what needed to be done. Who'd followed the evidence wherever it led. Who'd refused to accept the easy explanation when the real explanation was so much darker. The real hero, if there was one, was Diana Wolf. The woman who'd realized she'd been wrong and chose to admit it, even knowing it would destroy her. Even knowing it might cost her life. I think about her often. About the recordings she made, knowing they might be the only evidence of what really happened to her. About her determination to expose the truth, even when everyone around her was begging her to stay silent. About her final phone call, where she told Dr. Pierce that she'd rather be destroyed by the truth than preserved by a lie. That's courage. Real courage. Not the absence of fear, but the willingness to do what's right despite overwhelming fear. And in the end, Diana got what she wanted. The truth came out. The corrupt system was exposed. Innocent people were freed. Justice, however delayed and imperfect, was served. The system she'd been part of was built on a lie. The lie that conviction rates mattered more than truth. That closing cases was more important than ensuring the right person was convicted. That the end justified the means, no matter how many innocent lives were destroyed along the way. Diana Wolf spent most of her career upholding that lie. But at the end, she chose truth. And that choice, that final act of moral courage, redeemed everything that came before. This is Frank Lawson, and this was the story of Diana Wolf. A prosecutor who built her career on convictions. Who sacrificed truth for success. But who ultimately chose conscience over comfort. Who paid the highest price for telling the truth. And whose death accomplished what her life couldn't, exposing a corrupt system and freeing the innocent. If this story made you think about justice, about integrity, about the courage it takes to admit when you're wrong and try to make things right, then hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. It helps me continue investigating stories like this one, stories that need to be told even when powerful people don't want them exposed. And I want to hear from you. Here's my question. If you discovered you'd been part of something corrupt or wrong, something that had harmed innocent people, would you have the courage to come forward and expose it, even if it meant destroying your career, your reputation, maybe even risking your life? Or would you stay silent and try to live with the guilt? There's no right answer. It's one of the hardest moral questions any of us can face. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective matters. Until next time, stay vigilant. Stay curious. And never stop demanding accountability from those who wield power over our lives.